Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're doing something. Well, something pretty radical. We're going to dive into a collection of academic sources that are all centered on what is, maybe, the most famous origin story in the world, the Garden of Eden.
It is.
But our mission today is to completely overturn it.
Right, and that's a huge challenge because the traditional interpretation of Eden has been the absolute bedrock of morality, law, and even politics for thousands of years.
Of course, it's all about moral failure, original sin, guilt.
And the need for obedience to some kind of external authority. But what we're exploring today, based on these sources, is a concept that flips that entirely. The idea that Eden wasn't a fall from grace, but maybe the chronicle of humanity's first great ascent into rational thought.
And the main source we're drawing on is the work of a Central Asian linguist, Temujin Kuchgurov, and his Odam-Tili theory, or OTA. Now, this theory doesn't look at Adam and Eve as historical people or Eden as a real place.
No, not at all. It treats the entire story as a kind of linguistic fossil.
A linguistic fossil.
Yeah, a deeply coded narrative that actually preserves these fundamental, maybe even prehistorical, human discoveries about the nature of consciousness itself.
So OTA uses phonetic analysis, right? Looking at the actual sounds in the words.
Exactly. It analyzes phonetic structures and symbolic cognition to reread that whole Adam-Eve serpent sequence as what Kuchgurov calls a semiotic awakening.
Semiotic, meaning the study of signs and symbols.
Precisely. It's the moment humans achieved for the first time a real linguistic self-awareness and the capacity for rational thought.
So that's our mission for this deep dive, to uncover the cognitive and linguistic revolution that's supposedly coded into this myth. And then, and this is the part that gets a little chilling, to understand why political and religious elites might have intentionally taken this incredible story of human intellectual power
And reframed it.
and reframed it as a narrative of sin, failure, and ultimately dependence.
Okay, so let's unpack this core framework. If Eden is a cognitive map and not a history lesson, what makes this OTA theory so fundamentally different from, basically every interpretation we've ever heard?
It has to start with how it views myths in general, right?
It does. The foundational premise of OTA is that myths aren't just fairy tales. They are these incredibly structured containers for our earliest and most important discoveries.
Okay, give me an analogy.
Think of it like this. A geologist can look at a layer of rock and deduce the temperature, the pressure, the life forms that existed when that rock was formed.
Right, the data is baked into the material.
Exactly. Kuchgurov is suggesting that myths are linguistic fossils in the same way. We can look at their structure and deduce the cognitive processes and linguistic breakthroughs that were happening when that myth first came into being.
So we're peeling back the story to find the data structure underneath.
That's a perfect way to put it. Eden becomes this linguo-philosophical map. It dramatizes humanity's first real struggle with classification, with symbolic reasoning, with the very idea of knowledge.
Taking the world from chaos.
The chaos of the garden, this undifferentiated, unnamed world.
And turning it into a structured, conscious reality.
And the sources say this happened through three parallel awakenings. The first one is the most fundamental, the phonetic awakening.
So an awakening to sound itself.
To the structure of sound. It's the recognition that sound isn't just random noise. It's the discovery that there are real structured correspondences between the environment, motion, energy, texture, and the sounds we make to describe them.
Like the sound for a snake or water?
Or even the K sound, often representing something sharp or cutting across cultures. It's the moment sound becomes a symbolic structure.
Which would naturally lead to the next step.
Which is the semantic awakening. Now, you're not just making structured sounds, you're using them to differentiate categories. You're naming things, creating symbolic units.
Moving from just reacting to the world.
To categorizing it, manipulating it conceptually. This is the classic image of Adam naming the animals. That's the moment.
Okay, and then the third one. This feels like the big one. The reason the story had to be told in the first place.
This is the epistemic awakening. Now, epistemic just means relating to knowledge. And this is that profound, self-reflective moment where we realize that understanding isn't just possible. It's transformative.
And it comes from within.
It's internally derived. It's the birth of human conceptual sovereignty. The realization that I can figure things out, and when I do, it changes my reality.
So Eden is the moment consciousness itself acquired structure. It went from just seeing things to building abstract conceptual language about them.
That's it.
Okay, then that makes the whole story a celebration of our own intellect.
It does.
which completely flips the role of the serpent. I mean, the sources argue it's a proto-scientific symbol, not a symbol of evil. How does OTA even begin to explain a reversal that dramatic?
It starts by zooming way in to the phonetic level. It uses what's called phonosemantic analysis, and it focuses on that S phoneme, the sound of the serpent.
The hissing sound.
Right. Kuchkarov's work argues that the S, or the related or C sounds, might be one of the very first universal symbols rooted in just observing nature.
What observation?
Motion, flow, transformation. Anything that moves fluidly, continuously, the sound of wind, the sound of water, the slithering of a snake.
It's all connected to that sound.
It's directly connected. The sound mirrors the observation of wave motion, of constant change in the universe. So the creature becomes the physical embodiment of a linguistic concept.
The physical manifestation of an idea.
Precisely. And if you look across ancient cultures, Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, long before the Abrahamic traditions, the serpent almost always symbolized energy, knowledge, regeneration, cosmic cycles. It wasn't about moral corruption, it was about process, natural law.
That's a huge shift.
Uh-huh.
Okay, let's get into the deepest part of this linguistic code. The sources break down the root SCI and connect it to the actual word science. I need you to go slow here because this is probably the densest part of the analysis.
No problem. It's fascinating. The word science itself, according to OTA, is basically a preserved metaphor from this ancient cognitive discovery. The root SCI, that's SCI, is an encoded schema for motion and transformation.
Okay, let's do it piece by piece. The S, we know that one, serpentine motion. The flow of the universe.
Correct. The continuous flux. Then you add the C sound. Now, depending on the language, this can be a K or a chick sound. Phonetically, this sound almost always means cutting, branching, separating. It's the moment the continuous flow gets interrupted or analyzed.
Okay, so you've got observation of a flow and then the act of separating or classifying parts of that flow. What about the I?
The I vowel represents an internalized or a directed energy vector. It's focus. It's taking that observation, which you've just divided, and directing that understanding inward to master it conceptually.
So if I put those three actions together, continuous transformation,
The S.
the act of cutting or analyzing that transformation,
Yes.
and then internalizing the result. What does that structurally define?
It defines inquiry, rational categorization, continuous research. I mean, the linguistic implication is just massive. Science isn't just a word, it's a structural metaphor for observing natural law and the process of turning physical form into abstract understanding.
So the serpent is the process of gaining knowledge. It's not the temper leading you away from it.
That's the argument. It reframes the very nature of human curiosity.
Okay, what about the other two big symbols, the fruit and the duality of Adam and Eve? How does OTA see them?
The fruit isn't a forbidden snack. It's a metaphor for materialized information. I mean, think about a real fruit. What does it do? It contains the genetic code, the kernel compressed inside matter. The fruit is a symbol for the compression of knowledge into physical structure.
And the sources mentioned a link to binary information.
Yes, it symbolizes the circle dot duality.
Right.
The kernel at the center is like the 1, and the surrounding fruit is the 0. It's the fundamental binary unit of information, the atomistic core of reality. So eating the fruit is really about accepting that knowledge has structure and taking on the responsibility of classification.
And Adam and Eve, they're not people.
The duality of consciousness itself, structural representations of mind. Adam is the analytical pattern recognition part, the systematic naming mind.
But Eve is the real catalyst.
Eve is everything. She's interpreted as intuitive relational cognition, but most importantly, she has the epistemic initiative. She's the one who acts, who seeks the knowledge, who initiates the entire transformation.
So Eve's curiosity isn't a weakness, it's the highest form of human agency. She's basically performing the first act of scientific inquiry.
That's the reading.
Wow. Okay, this brings us to the huge political hinge point of this whole deep dive. If this story is a chronicle of humanity's greatest cognitive breakthrough, a story of empowerment, why on earth did the elites who came later, the priesthoods, the clergy, why did they all reframe it as a story of guilt and disobedience?
Because an empowered, self-governing mind is the single greatest threat to any form of centralized authority. Kuchkarov has a term for this, semiotic reversal as a tool of authority.
Narrative governance.
It's Narrative Governance 101. You restructure the meaning of words and symbols specifically to restrict people's sense of their own agency. They had to take the most empowering story about human self-discovery and twist it into a story about inherent failure.
Hold on, let me make sure I get that concept of reversal. You're saying they didn't just ban the search for knowledge, they actually managed to change the meaning of knowledge itself, to make curiosity a negative thing.
Exactly. They swapped the valence. Inquiry suddenly became rebellion. Curiosity became moral corruption. The pursuit of your own understanding became the original sin.
What were the practical political consequences of doing that, of criminalizing curiosity?
Well, the guild model served four critical functions for control. First, internalize subordination. If you believe humans are inherently fallen or defective, then you also believe they require external oversight, a priestly class, a king, to manage them
You're creating a need for your own authority.
before anyone's even born. Second, it creates epistemic inhibition. Inquiry is now rebellion, so people are discouraged from thinking critically about the established order.
Don't ask questions.
Right. And third, and this one is truly insidious, it creates self-suspicion. The individual becomes suspicious of their own mind. They start thinking, my own thoughts, my own desire to know things might be sinful. It might be leading me to another fall.
That is a terrifyingly complete system of control. You've essentially outsourced the policing to the individual.
You have. And the fourth function is metaphysical dependency. If the original source of knowledge, the fruit, is now seen as dangerous, then true, safe knowledge can only come from one place: the authorized elite, the interpreters.
The ones with the special connection to the divine.
Right. This entire narrative inversion guarantees that even if humans start to awaken to their own conceptual power, that very awakening is immediately framed as a fall.
That's a masterful piece of political engineering. To weaponize our highest faculty, the desire to understand against us.
It made intellectual sovereignty structurally impossible within that framework.
Okay, let's pivot. Let's look for evidence of this suppressed code. Are there places where we see the serpent being used as a positive symbol of knowledge, even within these traditional religious cultures?
There are. And one of the most striking examples comes from the intellectual world of Mirza Ulugh, the great astronomer and Timurid prince in Samarkand.
What did he do?
If you look at the architectural designs of his famous Ulugh Madrasa, his school, you see these serpentine geometric spiral motifs woven into the astronomical diagrams and the tiles.
But couldn't that just be decoration?
It's highly unlikely, because Ulugh was obsessed with precise celestial motion and mathematical law. OTA interprets these symbols as a kind of esoteric nod, a learned acknowledgement of the motion-knowledge equivalence principle.
Which is?
Knowledge is motion, motion is transformation, transformation is divine law. It was a subtle way for the scientists, the astronomers, to acknowledge that real knowledge comes from observing continuous change, the serpentine process, even while the official theology was preaching sin and stasis.
So they hid the truth of the cognitive ascent in the geometry of their scientific buildings. That's incredible.
It was a way to keep the code alive in a very specialized, protected environment.
Okay, let's jump from there to right now. The source material draws this really strong parallel between that ancient institutional control and our modern digital systems. It even calls it the algorithmic Eden. What does that look like for us today?
The mechanism of cognitive restriction is being replicated, but the gatekeepers are different. Instead of priests, we have algorithms.
The new containment.
Right. It relies on algorithmic feed loops, on attention harvesting architectures, and on enforcing a kind of short-form reactive thinking. It builds echo chambers.
So the system is designed to reward you for reacting instantly, for obeying the feed.
And it punishes depth. It punishes independent inquiry. These systems reward that emotional reactive thinking, and they actively suppress long-form analysis and reflection. The user is constantly fed information that narrows their conceptual space.
It's a perfect recreation of the old strategy.
It is. It discourages independent thought and rewards obedience to the external feed. We're not policed by theological dogma anymore, but by data-driven control over our attention and ultimately over our patterns of thought.
That's the modern epistemic inhibition. You don't doubt the authority of the feed, you just doubt any information that comes from outside of it.
It's the most efficient form of dependency ever created.
So before we wrap up, we have to touch on how this theory itself, OTA theory, has been received. The sources note that the academic world's response hasn't been to refute it, but has been one of overwhelming silence.
And that silence is really the 21st century defense mechanism against an uncomfortable truth. This theory doesn't just challenge theology. It challenges foundational assumptions in historical linguistics, in cognitive science, in the whole Eurocentric story of how rational thought developed.
So to even engage with it.
To engage with it would mean dismantling established authority structures in multiple fields at once. It's often safer and more effective to just ignore it, to make it invisible.
Okay, so to summarize this whole profound shift in understanding, Eden is not a story about falling or about guilt. It's about rising. It's about awakening. It's the philosophical chronicle of human cognitive sovereignty.
That's the core takeaway. The serpent symbolizes pattern, science, and transformation. The fruit symbolizes material semantic structure, the informational binary. Eve symbolizes epistemic initiative, the drive to know. And Eden itself symbolizes the birth of structured conceptual language.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to take away. A thought connecting this ancient political maneuver to our modern technological world. The sources conclude that this story of awakening remains threatening for one simple reason, and it raises a crucial question. If the history of civilization really is, as OTA suggests, the history of converting human cognition into a state of hierarchical dependency, what does that mean for our future?
Because the great unspoken lesson from this deep dive seems to be this. An awakened mind, a truly self-aware and sovereign mind, is fundamentally and by its very nature ungovernable.